What is up, everyone? Welcome to another editing tutorial in Lightroom Classic. This is episode 2 of our 5-part series on Lightroom. This is a masterclass, and in last week's episode we went over the basic adjustment panel, and this week's video we're going over the local adjustments. Before we keep going, I just want to say, please go down and smash that like button just like everyone else. It's really helping the channel grow, and you guys should get notified about these videos if you subscribe. So subscribe and hit the bell while you're down there. This week's video, we are covering 4 panels inside of Lightroom, and then after we're done with this video, we are going to go into coloring, profile corrections, and presets, which will cover the last 8 remaining panels that we'll have in Lightroom. And then you guys should be a complete master at Lightroom and be ready to dive into Photoshop or other editing tools. So without any further ado, let's hop right into the screen and get into this week's video on local adjustments and edits. So in last week's video, we went over the histogram panel in depth, and we also went over this first basic panel in Lightroom. As I said, we have these remaining panels to go over, and then we're going to be creating presets, which is hidden over in this panel. But in this week, we are covering the crop tool, the heal tool, the Redeye tool, and the most important, this tool, which is the masking tool for our local adjustments. So you may be asking yourself, why would I want to use local adjustments? Why can't I just use the basic panel for everything? Well, I'm going to give you some examples. So let's look at this photo from last episode. We learned that we can raise the highlights, and we can also lower these shadows or raise them also. But if we lower these shadows all the way, we might notice that there's 2 primary areas where these shadows are lowering. They're lowering in this area, and they're lowering in this area. If we only wanted to affect one of those, we would have to do some kind of local adjustment. And that's where our masking and our local adjustments come in. We can choose which areas we want to impact by these general changes. So in general, our local adjustments are just going to be a copy of this panel and then pasted onto certain areas of our photo instead of impacting the whole photo all at once. Same with the highlight tab. We could see if we wanted to lower all of our highlights, we can do it in this basic panel, but if we only wanted to lower the sky or maybe just the wall, then we would have to do some kind of local adjustments because the highlight panel impacts both of these at the same time. So in this episode, I'm going to break down these 4 tools right here, and that will complete our basic overview in this panel, and then all that we have left are these specialized panels for very special edits. So let's go hop into a new fresh photo to learn some of these new Lightroom tools. This is a film photo that I took on CineStill 800T on an Olympus point-and-shoot camera. If you're interested in the behind the scenes, I'll have the video to this linked below. But this is a film photo, and what we notice in film photos is you usually get the composition off, and there's definitely some imperfections inside of these cameras. So the first thing that I'm going to do is open up this tool all the way on the left, and it kind of looks like a box with some arrows. There's 2 things that we want to do. We want to crop, and there's many different ways we can crop, and actually in Lightroom they have imported this section that lets you check the different ways that you can crop your photo. All you have to do is press O on your keyboard, and you cycle through these different composition techniques. So as you can see, these all have different names for them. This is the golden ratio. It is a specific type of composition technique. It's not one that I usually use. I don't know what this is. This might just be for different kind of crops, it looks like. This is a grid, and this is the typical rule of thirds grid. And for me personally, this is the one that I use most, but if I need to center something, I will definitely cycle to this just to make sure that I get something completely centered. And this is also good for other kinds of unique compositions, especially ones that are using lights and shadows very drastically. But for this, since it's a portrait, I'm just going to go with the general rule of thirds, not the golden ratio or anything. And I'm just going to center this photo because with these 35mm point and shoots, your photos usually don't come out completely centered and straightened. So I'm just going to center this. I'm actually going to crop this. Like I said, all of our options are here. I'm just going to crop this to 6x7. And if you don't have this option, you can enter custom here and put in 6x7. I'm going to put 6x7 for me. And then I'm just going to punch in right here and make this a little bigger. Just put in that face and eyes around the third. So we're just going to pop that right there. This photo doesn't look to be too unstraightened, but if you wanted to straighten this photo more, you can do it manually by taking this ruler, and you can straighten according to any line that you have in your photo just by dragging around. Obviously we don't want to do that. And then we can use this auto tool, which will use Lightroom's built-in features to try to straighten the photo for us. I think that didn't work too well because it kind of looks like the eyes are a little center. I think I'd want to center these lines for me in this photo. So what I'm going to do is, if you go up to the corner of these, as you can see, you can just drag here to make this bigger and wider. But if you go a little outside of this, you will change that to a rotation arrow, and you can actually change this. And I'm just going to line up these eyes so they're more straight in. And for me, this is a film photo. It doesn't have to be perfect. But if I'm doing landscape or architectural photography, then I definitely want to make sure that I have these lines absolutely perfect. Now we're going to hop into the second tool, and this is the heal in the clone brush. It kind of looks like a band-aid icon. So we're going to click that, and you can see we have the option to clone or heal. Personally, I like to heal. Cloning is good if you have a repeating pattern that is very symmetrical, because then you could clone that perfectly and delete whatever object or distraction is in the way of your photo. But heal works better if you need to sample out of other areas. So I'm going to do heal, and what I like to do is have the opacity at 100. You will see why soon. And I also like to have the feather at 100. Once again, you will see why very shortly. And the size very much just depends on the photo. And what you can do is that you can actually use the left and right bracket keys, and you will see that this will increase and decrease the size. You can hold this down or click them. I'm just going to hold it down until I get to an area that I like. And I wouldn't say that there's too many distracting elements in this photo, but there are some stuff that I will get rid of just for the purpose of this video. If we go up to the top here, I might not like this light that's kind of different from the rest of them. I can also go and remove this one. I'm just going to clone that out, and you can see this sampled from an area over here, and it does a very good job. You could see if I close this panel that those images are just completely gone, and it looks very natural in what we have. Here's a little before and after. You can see that those distractions are removed. So we're going to hop into another photo just to show that clone and heal again. And we're going to go to that heal. You're going to have 100% opacity and feather. And we are going to go over this little number right here. And as you can see, that sampled that area over there. It's definitely not perfect. We can see that it has sampled some of this top area, which is something I don't like. I will say I don't usually use this tool that much in Lightroom because it doesn't sample as well as Photoshop does, but I will show you the ability of the tool just in case you need to use it. So if we decrease this feather amount here, you can see that more of this sampled area is showing through. Now you can see the texture, you can see this line very clearly defined. But if we raise that feather again, you can see it kind of blends it a lot more smoothly. So that's why we want to have our feather high. And then with opacity, we want our opacity to be at 100% if we're trying to remove something, because we don't want to see that object at all. If we brought this opacity down, then that number that was there on the screen before will show back up. So the opacity can be lowered if you want to blend, but most of the time when you're using clone or heal, you're trying to remove, so you'd want this opacity to be at 100%. So that's just a quick and dirty rundown of the clone and heal tool. I definitely recommend using it in Photoshop if you have the ability, but if you need that quick and dirty job, then this can definitely do it. The third tool that we have for today is the Redeye correction tool, and it looks like an eye with a plus icon. If we click this, this is just a very simple tool. You really won't have to use it much with modern cameras, but in the case that you have to and you're using a film camera like this, then all you have to do is just hover over the eye right here, make a selection that's bigger than the red eye, and Lightroom will do a great job in just removing that red eye. It's honestly a great tool. I don't think it needs its whole button up here. It acts like it's a very important tool, but if you need it, then it works very quickly, very easily, and you can see the before and after. This was without those removals and the red eye removal, and there we have them turned on. So just a great simple tool. If you need it, it is right there. It's a very prominent tool for no good reason, I feel like, but on to the next tool. Right, you have made it this far. We are 3 tools into our 4-tool episode today, and as I said, this is on local adjustments, and we are really getting into the local adjustments with our next panel, which is the masking panel. And this is something that can definitely separate pro photographers from amateur photographers, so definitely watch this part and keep it saved and liked to make sure you can reference this if you ever need to. So let's hop into our photo, and we can see our fourth tool today is an outline of a circle with some faded dots on the inside. That is what the icon looks like. So we're just going to click this, and you can see that we have our masking panel. And there are definitely some things I don't like about this. This is a newer masking panel that Lightroom has just put in, but it definitely is very powerful, and I love the way that they have divided this panel. Up top, we have two options to select very easy mask. These are what I would like to call the smart mask, and these are our subject selection and our sky selection. Both of these are completely done by Lightroom's own processing, so you don't have to actually select these yourself. It's just one click and done, assuming that the program can select a good mask. Moving on to the second bunch of these is our manual selections and masking. We have our brush, which is the most manual and probably the most powerful tool. Then we have the linear gradient and radial gradient, which are definitely very good for manipulating light and adding a lot to your photo. And then in the third panel, we have our range mask selection. This has the color and luminance selectors. There is the depth range, but it's not something that I use. I think you have to have a different type of photo. Mine's grayed out. It doesn't even look like I can use it. But the color range and the luminance range are very good for editing those certain parts of your photo that have a certain tonal value or color value. You will see how powerful these tools can be. But like I said, we have our smart selections, our manual selections, and our range selections broken up into 3 mask groups. Now, the thing that I don't like about this panel is that when we select a mask, I'm just going to do select sky for the first example. You can see that this kind of changes the way the panel looks. So the first thing that I would do if you've never used this panel is I would drag this and just place this right here. This is it's just better to have everything on this right panel, I prefer, and then you could see more of the options. Like you can see, this is our mask. You can rename this mask actually, so we can call this our sky. And when we click this mask, we have the option to add to this mask. So let's say this smart selection was not perfect. We can actually add to this mask, and you can add to this mask with any one of those masks that I just previously told you about. And same, you can also subtract from this mask with any of those masks that I told you about. So you can create really complex mask or really similar mask. And I've definitely said mask a lot right now, so if you're confused, I'm sorry, but this is the masking panel. There's a lot of masks. So one other thing that you could see that's very interesting is that once we created this mask, we have this red area where our mask is, and this can be toggled on and off with the O key again. So we use O to toggle on and off where that mask is. The red means that the mask is selected, and we can see this reflected in this black and white box on the side over here. The black means it's not selected, the white means it is selected. That is the general theme of mask. Black will not be affected, white will be affected. Just know that. Or you can look at the photo. Any area that's not colored will not be affected. Any area that is colored red or your overlay can be changed to a different color. Whatever color you choose and whatever color is activated and selected in that range, if you see that color, then that is where the image will be affected. And once you know where your mask will impact, you hit the O key. Now you know this is the area that it's going to impact, and you can see that we have a new panel, which is almost a complete copy of the basic panel that we went over from last episode. So this panel is basically duplicated only for the sky. So all of these tools that we learned about last week, plus a few additional tools that I can briefly go over, are only going to impact the sky, as you can see. So we can go ahead and close this basic option, and now we can just go ahead and impact the sky how we want. So for instance, something that I did in this photo is I like to color match my hotel with my sky a little bit. So we are able to do that with either our temperature tools. We can try to play around with that. Or something that's even easier than that is we can actually use this hue tool. And this hue tool is something we will see later on in the course in our HSL tab. But this hue actually just impacts that color of the photo. So I can take this and I can color match this pretty similar to the hotel here. And you can see that if I toggle this image on and off, this only impacted the sky. And this is very good because now our sky is a different color, but we didn't manipulate any of the other colors in our photo. So just continuing on with this, something we learned about was saturation. I would lower the saturation, and I'd probably also lower these highlights. And now you could see both the color and the tone of these two are very similar now. And that's something that's very powerful. So this panel, like I said, only impacts our new mask. And that is very powerful for us. And the additional things that are added to this panel are some of the things that we'll see later on in the panels throughout the course. Like I said, is we have a hue option, which just changes the color. This is a very powerful tool, so definitely do not overdo it. We have sharpness, which isn't really going to be seen here, but this will sharpen the photo or de-sharpen it. It's not something I like too much. It is something that you can use very rarely, but you don't want to use it too much or your photo can look processed too much, so I usually don't touch that. Noise, this just increases or decreases the amount of noise in your photo. It's also something you won't use that much, but it is something we can get into. Moire is a weird one. It's a processing kind of failure. If you have very close dots or stripes, then it can create a very unpleasing pattern to the eye. If you've ever zoomed in and out of photos, you would have seen like a weird kind of impact on the photo, even though nothing's really happening to the photo. That's kind of moire in a static photo, and this will go and increase and decrease that effect. It can be very powerful in the right situation, but moire and noise are kind of like the red eye effect. Is you don't really need them that much, but if you do, they're here and they're very powerful. Defringe actually is a pretty good option. If you are editing too much inside of this panel, then you can see that this can create like a fringe line. And in this, we can kind of increase or decrease that fringe line. And it doesn't work perfectly, especially when you're manipulating so hard. But if you are using more advanced mask, you can definitely play around with defringe. It basically only affects around the edge of the photo and tries to smoothen that blend, kind of like when we were using the heel and the clone, how we had the feather. The defringe is kind of like a feather for the edge. So we're going to go ahead and delete all the mask for this photo, and then we're just going to go one by one. We are going to learn what each of these masks do, and we're just going to completely edit this photo, just all local edits. I'm going to walk you guys through this, and you're going to see a decently edited, hopefully, photo using only local mask. So whereas we learned the basic panel for quick and good work, the local panel is definitely good if we want to just take our time with the image and really craft it into a photo that we like. So first off, I will say when I'm usually editing a photo, I kind of go through like a technical process in my brain, like what kind of mask I want to use and what kind of edits I want to do. So if it was for me, I'd say I would probably brush this area here and raise those shadows, probably brush over here, lower these shadows. I would change the sky, the crystal sands, and the car color to match this color of the hotel, and that would be all done with either color range or brush or some other technique. But for the instance of this video, I'm going to go through every mask and kind of make every one of them work. You don't have to use every mask. It can definitely get a little bit confusing. Usually only need to use maybe like 1 to 5 masks in a photo just to impact those areas that you really want to have emphasis on. But if you're really crafting a photo, then you can end up with like 20 masks. And I do want to say that Photoshop is basically all mask. So if you end up mastering this local adjustment and masking pattern here, then you will have a very easy transition into Photoshop later. So let's hop into this edit now. So the first mask that we're going to test out is the select subject, and this is just Photoshop selecting what it thinks the subject is. And as you can see, it did a decent job. It selected the car, which was good, but it also selected areas that we didn't want. So for me, I would click this mask here and I would hit the subtract. So I would subtract with a brush just so we can brush out those areas. And this is the same. We get those brush things that we had in the heel and clone areas. We have feather, flow, density. Really, you just want to have these all cranked up. Flow is basically you can slowly paint on the area, but when it comes to mask, we don't really need that unless we're doing dodging and burning or other advanced techniques that we would get into in Photoshop. That's when we need flow. And density, we just want to have at 100%, so we make sure we're impacting all of that area all at once. And then, like I said, size again, we can change with our left and right brackets to make sure we're really getting into the photo. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to subtract from this mask just by painting away with this brush here. And this doesn't have to always be perfect. If you really wanted to, you could zoom into your photo and really get into it. Just for the example and speed of this video, I'm not going to do that. I'm kind of just doing a quick dirty mask. Now, I think we've selected our subject pretty well, and we can hit O to untoggle our mask. And now we can just hop right into this panel over here, and now we could impact only this car. So we could start to brighten and raise this, and we want to know, as we're doing local adjustments, it looks more like a collage. Like if you raise this up, it would kind of look like you just pasted a picture of a car on this photo. So you want to keep these edits subtle so they're still realistic. So like I said, I'd probably up the shadows on this car, but as you can see, I don't want it to pop too much. So I'd raise it up a little bit, raise that exposure a little bit, and I think I'm happy with that select subject. We could get into more stuff later in mask, but I'll just say, for this mask, we just say brighten car. So the next mask that we're going to hop into is select sky, and this is something I always showed before, but we're kind of just going to do the same thing. We're going to wait for this processing to go. I think that's a near perfect mask, so I'm not going to add or delete from it. And then one thing I'd like to say is you can have a certain effect here. You can either save effects or have preset effects. I have a saved effect called empty, which is just resetting all of the panel to 0, because sometimes if you're using these panels, then the panel, when you automatically apply that mask, will impact the photo right away, and it won't look good, and I just want to have a blank canvas every single time. I'm going to select my empty preset that I have right here. I'm going to go ahead and rename this to sky, just like we did before. I'm going to hit O to toggle off that mask, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to change this hue to kind of get it similar to that color of the building here. Just going to lower those highlights a little bit. And this definitely comes with a little trial and error. Like, these colors might not be exactly perfect, but you could inspect these colors to get them to be perfect. Just going to lower that a little bit, and I think that is a nice base so far. So now we have two masks, and you can see we can just hop back and forth between these masks. We can choose which ones we want to edit at any single time. If we want to add or subtract from any of them, we can do that, or just delete one mask. But for this scenario, we're just going to keep piling on mask today. So that was both of the smart selection masks, but we did have to edit the select subject just because it was not perfect. And now we're going to get into my preferred method, which is the brush. I just like to do things manually, and having the brush as an option is something that I like. What I'm going to do with the brush is I'm just going to keep this simple. I think the wheel is still a little bit underexposed, so I'm just going to highlight over this wheel here. I don't mind too much that there's a little bit of a feather around it, at least not until I see what the edit is. Just going to toggle off the O, and I'm just going to raise these shadows, kind of just get it up into an area where I could see that wheel. And I see the detail, but it's a little bright, so I'm going to darken these blacks so I could keep the detail but have a lower tone. You can see we can toggle on and off this mask with this eye icon right here, and we can see that we just added a little bit of pop of detail, which is good for me. So we're just going to call this wheel, and we're going to move on. Next up, we have the linear gradient, and I think this is such a good, powerful tool. I absolutely love linear gradients. I think they're very good for manipulating light, and I will let you guys check that out right now. Just as an example of a linear gradient, you can see that we have these two areas. We have this area right here on this line. This is a hard mask. Everything over here is at 100%. And then as we go on through this area, there is a transition. And right over here is at 0%. So within this mask, we have this fade off, which actually gives off a very natural looking mask if you can use it correctly. If you want a harder edge, you make your mask smaller. If you want a softer edge, you can make it very big, and you don't even have to put that 100% spot on. You could just drag this mask off and have that little shine of red coming in. And that's kind of like what we're going to be doing. But I'm going to take this mask, and after we can see we can rotate these masks and then move them like this, I'm going to make a relatively small mask. I'm going to crunch this down, and I'm going to kind of match this line over here with the car. And I'm going to bring this down, and I'm just going to darken this foreground kind of to bring more attention to the car. So turn that mask off, and I'm just going to lower the exposure, and that's going to lower all of these values inside this foreground, which is going to bring more attention to this car right here. And I think that's good. We'll just call this foreground. I can't type. And we're going to save that mask, and that is the linear gradients. I love these. Great tool. The next up for our manual selections is the radial gradient, and this is very similar to the linear gradient, except this one is round, and this becomes very good for kind of emulating the sun. I like to make this really big and kind of just pop this off in the corner where the sun is coming from. You can see that we have shadows coming in this way, so the sun would kind of be somewhere in like this area. So same thing, this area is going to be 100%. This area is going to be about 0%, and then we can just kind of expand this. We can make it into an oval if we want to kind of impact the area. And I kind of want to add like a little sunshine effect to this photo, make it a little more bright. So we're just going to make that big, and then we're going to zoom back into our photo. We're going to toggle off our mask, and I'm just going to expose this brighter. As you can see, it's kind of emphasizing the light from here. And I'm going to add kind of a golden glow to this photo, kind of emphasize like golden hour. So now you can see we have a darkened foreground. We have a more bright sun area. It's kind of adding a little more dimension to our photo. We could see the beginning photo was very flat, and with our general adjustments, we got it to a good place where we could edit it. But with our local adjustments, we're really manipulating the photo. We're really manipulating the light in this, and we're really getting that specialized effect. So let's continue on with our mask. Next up is color range, and this is very good if you want to change, alter, or remove a color from your photo. I'm going to go in here. I'm going to select these blues, kind of just see what it is. We can see that this mask was kind of heavy. It kind of impacted more of the area than I wanted it to. I kind of want just the deep blues of the car. So we can refine this mask with this tool right here, and we can see if this will select a better range for us. I'm not really loving the range that's given us, so I'm kind of just going to delete this mask and try again. So we're going to try the color range again. I'm going to try picking it from this sign here. I think this is a more specific looking blue. So I'm just going to zoom in and select this blue right here. And let's see what the mask is. It's still a heavy mask. It's not working too well for me right now. But I am going to refine this, and it looks okay. We could see. If anything, I was going to maybe change the colors in this mask, but it looks like I'll have to do that with another one. I'm just going to lower this exposure a little bit, kind of neutralize and make those blues pop out a little more. Maybe add a little more contrast and a tiny bit of saturation. So that's with that mask. It just kind of added a little bit of pop to that blue area that we have. We are going to name this mask blue just to know that it altered our blues. And then we're going to go ahead and we are going to select our last mask, which is the Luminance range. Now this mask is good because it allows us to select which tonal exposure values we want to impact without impacting the rest of them. So if I kind of just want to darken our midtones, we can select this area, and we could see that this selected our midtones right here, which is probably a pretty fine selection. I'm okay with that. It didn't select too much of the highlights, it didn't select too much of the shadows, but it also has a nice little blend. We can change how much that this blends over here. As you can see, if it's too harsh like that, it'll definitely be noticeable. So I kind of like the blend that they had. And then we could also change our midpoint right here. And we could also change how much of this range is 100% impacted. Definitely just play with this if you need to, but it is definitely a powerful tool. So after all of that, I'm just going to do what I said, just bring down those tonal values a little more, kind of add a little more contrast to this photo. So that was an overview of every single mask that we have inside of Lightroom and a little example of what you can do with all of them. You can definitely get very creative with these and do anything with it. But just to finish off this edit, so I would be pretty happy with this. Like, I think this photo looks very good for the edit that we gave it. I would just completely close out of this masking panel, and you can see we didn't even touch the basic panel, which I said you could do 90% of your work in from last episode. We didn't even touch that, and we basically have a fully edited photo, which looks absolutely amazing with some more light, some more dimension, and there are some weird artifacts you can see. Like once I go back and forth, I could see some weird artifacts like in this area, but that's something we could go back to the mask. We can fix them. We can lower opacity. We can lower the values that we have. But just for the sake of this video, I'm not going to worry about that. Now, if I wanted to, I could play around with these values, and now I can edit the image as a whole after I've edited those areas. Or you could do something different. You can edit the image and get that base image like we talked about before, and then you could add the local mask. Really, there's no right or wrong way to edit. I'm just teaching you guys in this order. But now you can see we can really raise those shadows a lot now that they're all tied together. We can kind of like lower the contrast like we did last episode, and then we can drop our clarity. That was a little too much, but drop our clarity, and then we could see we have a nice base image. We can go in and we can crop to what we want. I said I like 4:5 in the vertical format, so I'll just crop to that. And then you can see I kind of just want the shadow to be complete, so we're going to go ahead and just clone that out. Make this a little bigger so we get this all dark, but we can clone that right there. It's definitely sampling from a weird area, but I'm just going to close out of this. My computer looks like it wants to crash. Now we can see we have a better looking line. It kind of adds a better line to this photo. And we have a pretty nice looking image. And yeah, that was an overview of all of these 4 tools up top here in Lightroom. It is a big deep dive into local adjustments, which is something that you have to play around with for hours. Just watch other people's videos, look at other people's posts and see what local adjustments may they have done, and then try to implement those local adjustments into your photo. I would recommend brush, that luminance mask, the color mask, and the radial filter. All of those are great ones to learn. The select sky is very good for quick and dirty, as well as the select subject. I definitely do use them, so I'm not going to say not to use the automatic ones. But the manual ones, if you can learn that and understand how you are making your mask and how you are editing your mask, then you will slowly and surely become a Lightroom master and a great photo manipulator and editor. But I will show you guys a quick sneak peek into next episode, just because I wasn't able to do it in the local adjustment because I didn't get a good mask, and I didn't want to spend time making a good mask. But if we hop into a quick preview for next episode, we could see our HSL panel. And if we hover over this little panel right here, this kind of does like a little color mask too. And we can change the look of our car right here. We can bump this down, bump our saturation down, and now look, we have a completely color matched image in like 5 seconds. But that is all for next episode. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. This is episode number 2 of my Lightroom Masterclass. Make sure to smash that like button just like everyone else, and subscribe so you don't miss these videos. Hit that bell, and I will catch you guys in the next one. Peace.